Good evening. Just yesterday, it looked as though Boris Johnson could be making a comeback. But the former Prime Minister and Mayor of London pulled out of the leadership race last night. He claimed he did have enough support to get on the ballot paper, but said it just wasn't the right time. By the end of the week, Rishi Sunak will be our new Prime Minister, our third in 7 weeks. Close aides from Boris Johnson's City Hall days say he should never have been allowed to rerun so soon after being voted out by his own MPs. But as our political correspondent Simon Harris reports, he's not ruling out a return in the future.
4 months ago, Rishi Sunak played a key role in evicting Boris Johnson from Downing Street. Now he's firmly ended the former Prime Minister's hopes of a comeback by claiming the crown for himself.
I am humbled and honoured to have the support of my parliamentary colleagues and to be elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party.
Boris Johnson finally abandoned his latest bid to become Prime Minister last night. He knew he didn't have the backing of a majority of Tory MPs. He also faces an inquiry about whether he lied to Parliament over Partygate. In a statement he said, "I believe I have much to offer, but I am afraid that this is simply not the right time." Most London Tory MPs breathed a sigh of relief.
Whoever is the Prime Minister is going to have a lot on their plate to do with the cost of living, the ongoing war in Ukraine, rising energy costs. Adding on top of that the challenges which he faces as a result of some of his personal conduct issues, simply I think makes that a step too far. So I think he made the right decision to sit this one out.
It's quite difficult, I think, having left office less than 6 weeks ago, having been Prime Minister and found yourself out of office because so many of your colleagues had lost confidence in you to stand again.
It's good to see that actually most Tory MPs were, happy to draw a line under the Boris Johnson era and move forward with somebody else.
When Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, Daniel Moylan, now a peer, was a close advisor.
Was Boris right to enter the contest so soon after being forced to resign?
Boris, you remember when he was mayor, he gave an interview and he was asked, "Oh, do you want to be Prime Minister?" And he said, "Well, if the ball comes loose from the scrum," he said, on a rugby analogy. And so Boris saw the ball come loose and he went for it. Maybe he shouldn't have done.
Boris Johnson's return to the backbenches might also disappoint the nation's cartoonists. His time in Downing Street is the subject of a new exhibition at London's Cartoon Museum.
All of the cartoonists you speak to say that was one of the really good things. He was very easy to draw, very easy to kind of caricature, and just kept kind of giving more and more stuff for them to draw about.
Will he be back?
Oh yeah, I think Boris Johnson is a huge force in British politics, and not least in the Conservative Party, and he's got years left in it.
But tonight the Conservative Party has moved on. The immediate plans of the MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip are not clear.
So not clear, Simon. So what is next for Boris Johnson then?
Well, Rishi Sunak has talked about a cabinet of all the talents, so perhaps there would be room for Mr Johnson in that. But would he actually accept a job? In his statement last night, he said he'd reached out to Rishi Sunak and Penny Mordaunt in the hope of coming together in the national interest, but sadly they were unable to do so. That suggests there is still some friction between Mr Sunak and Mr Johnson. Mr Johnson even implying that Mr Sunak and Miss Mordaunt were partly to blame for his withdrawal from the leadership race. There's been other suggestions that perhaps the new Prime Minister will offer Mr Johnson a special envoy to Ukraine role. But on the other hand, it might be that the former Prime Minister has decided to take a back seat from frontline politics for a while and make some serious money.
Simon, thank you.
Good evening. Just after midnight last night, 2 men were shot dead in Ilford. A third man is critically injured in hospital after what's being described as a gang-related fight. The sound of gunshots were masked, neighbours say, by fireworks for the Hindu celebration Diwali. While police say they'll have more officers on patrol tonight, residents tell us drug dealing is rife in the area and they don't feel safe. Here's Simon Harris now with the latest.
The grim toll of Londoners murdered since the start of the year passed 90 today. The latest victims were shot dead in a terraced house at Ilford in the early hours of this morning.
Around say about 12:15, I heard screams and shouting just below where I stay. So I said, I popped up, I saw through my window and I saw kids running around. There's so much shouting, male voice shouting.
Within minutes, ambulances and police, some of them armed, arrived in Henley Road.
Inside the address, our officers found 3 men with gunshot wounds, 2 of whom have sadly died. The third victim remains in hospital with critical injuries.
Whatever the motive for the killings, the police aren't saying, but people living here seem in no doubt. If, as local people suspect, this was a gangland shooting, it might have been timed to coincide with the start of Diwali. Last night there was a constant soundtrack of fireworks, which would likely have masked the noise of gunshots. Just across the street is Jubilee Gardens, popular with pigeons and it seems a known gathering place for drug dealers.
So many people sits there like a gangs, and we always keep complaining to the council, like look at that, and then they're fighting, they're shouting, they're putting the music up, and all the time, and then we keep finding out there's so many drug dealers.
The local council has responded by installing CCTV cameras, but drugs continue to blight this community like so many others.
People help each other out, but then you got the other elements of society that basically who aren't into the community spirit. They're just on drug dealing and just fighting each other and hanging around in gangs. So there's a lot of gang activity in Ilford.
I advise not to come out around this area after 10.
The leader of Redbridge Council, Jazz Athwell, hopes to be the next Labour MP for this part of Ilford and wants more police.
We've worked for the last 2 years with the police, with our enforcement team, making sure that this is a safe place for people to walk home, and we'll continue to do so. But we have to press for more resources as well, because the thin blue line is very, very thin at the moment.
Tonight, the police are appealing for anyone who knows anything about the shootings to get in touch. Simon Harris, ITV News, Ilford.
Good evening. A rapper known as Giddy has been named locally as one of the 2 people shot dead in a suspected gangland shooting in Ilford. Police are appealing for witnesses while another man remains in hospital after officers were called to reports of a shooting in the early hours of yesterday. Neighbours and those who live in the area told ITV News they had repeatedly reported problems to the police, and it was known as a place rife with drugs and gang activity. They say had the force acted sooner, they wouldn't have had 2 dead bodies on their street. Our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
I lost it all and had to start from square one. Now I'm calling up the plug for.
This is Giddy, a drill rapper from Ilford in East London, believed to be one of the victims of Tuesday's fatal double shooting.
I can tell you about the food man lost and all the food man sold. Had to start off on my own.
The killing claimed the lives of 2 men, one 23, the other 30, shot at a house in Henley Road. Today, police were searching for clues in the street. Local people suspected the house was a drug den. Colin, who lives opposite, saw police attempting CPR on one of the victims.
It's terrible around here. That house has been known for people going in and out, and I don't think the police have done anything about that. So, and then this is the result of, it's probably a drug war.
There were a lot of fireworks because of Diwali. Did you hear the shots?
Yes, I did, yes. Amongst the fireworks. Just heard about 20 shots, didn't take any notice of it. It's about 20, there was quite a lot.
It's thought Giddy belonged to Drillford, a local group locked in a deadly feud with OM, or Only Manor, a gang from Manor Park. Messages of condolence on social media refer to the rivalry. Local people I've spoken to over the last 24 hours tell a story familiar to so many murder scenes in London. An area blighted by drug dealing and gang crime, but where complaints to the authorities and pleas for help seem to go unanswered. Henley Road is just off the busy Ilford Lane, once notorious for prostitution, but now known for its diverse street food. Jerome, a businessman, recalls another drug den a few streets away during lockdown.
It was a hive activity and the drug addicts were all over Ilford Lane at the time.
Looking like zombies, you said?
Yeah, they were walking looking like zombies, correct, yeah. They weren't difficult to spot. And I did notice in the last few months a re-emergence of the same sort of people. So I knew there was something locally around that was bringing them to Ilford.
A few minutes away is Frentford Youth Club, open every day until 10 p.m. Part of its mission is to get youngsters off the streets and steer them away from crime. Irfan, its chief executive, lives just a few roads from where this latest shooting happened.
So for me, it's a big shock. I am concerned because my children walk that way to school. But the main problem right now is there is not enough resources for the police to do their job. And we need to break up these gangs and we need to dismantle them so then they don't affect the young people of the next generation.
Sam Tarry is the local MP.
It's not an area that's been afflicted by vicious gang crime. It doesn't mean that gangs don't operate in this area. That's certainly not what I'm saying they do, but it's been on a lower scale, low sort of level drugs and so forth, and this looks like it's spilled over into something far more serious and shocking.
Police still haven't confirmed the names of the victims. A third man was also shot and is critically ill in hospital. Simon Harris, ITV News, Ilford.
Children in Tower Hamlets have been protesting against Mayor Lutfur Rahman's decision to get rid of traffic restrictions around their primary school. The new mayor ordered workmen to remove planters and barriers around Chisenhale School in Bow this morning that were put there as part of a safer street scheme. Our political correspondent Simon Harris has the story.
Political activism isn't normally part of the primary school curriculum, but at Chisenhale School in Bow today, pupils were manning the barricades. Their parents are furious at plans by Tower Hamlets Council to scrap school streets, the car exclusion zones introduced during lockdown. The traffic restrictions allowed the school to create a mini playground in the road.
We're all protesting because the council wants to take this space and over there away. It's not that wide a pavement really, so it's harder for us to know where the cars are or where they're not if it's gone.
They're taking the rights of children to play and they're also risking people dying.
This morning, contractors arrived to begin dismantling the barriers, but confronted by a hastily assembled group of parents and children, they were forced to withdraw.
Some of the structure was built by the kids, it's got the kids' artworks in it, all of the paintings on the floor and so on. So the sense that all of that would be removed without discussion really upset the children, and that I think is a lot of the motivation for the parents too, along with safety.
School streets in Tower Hamlets are being scrapped on the orders of Lutfur Rahman, the council's controversial mayor. He was re-elected in May, despite serving a 5-year ban from public office for electoral fraud. We asked for an interview with Mr Rahman, but were told he wasn't available. Instead, Tower Hamlets gave us a statement in which the mayor said the school street here was part of an experimental traffic order, or ETO. The statement added, the ETO has now lapsed and the mayor has decided, in keeping with his manifesto promise to reopen the roads, that the road closures will not be made permanent.
Since the mayor was elected, he's been consulting on ripping out all sorts of low traffic infrastructure across the borough, and there's been such an amazingly energetic response to it. I think people have really come together, and you can see that here today.
What do you think of the council?
I think they're really rude and that's being really disrespectful to our school.
The contractors are expected to try again tomorrow. The parents have promised the army of pint-sized protesters will also be back. Simon Harris, ITV News, Bow.
Now, the West End is looking forward to its first Christmas without COVID restrictions since 2019, but it's not all festive cheer thanks to a new challenge. Yes, the cost of living crisis. Businesses are being hit by rising prices just as shoppers, drinkers and diners are tightening their belts. And even the Christmas lights are going to lose some of their sparkle, as our political correspondent Simon Harris reports.
Christmas is coming, but the lights are going out. The 300,000 bulbs in Oxford Street's seasonal display might be energy-saving LEDs, but in a break with tradition, they won't be on 24 hours a day.
Obviously, we're in a cost of living crisis, so we're acutely aware of the cost of energy as part of that. And we really recognise that consumers want to come and experience the magic in the nighttime hours, but in the day, it would be more appropriate to have them switched off.
The lights will also be switched off overnight. Across London, shops, bars and restaurants are bracing themselves for another challenging Christmas. At Seven Dials Market, a food court in Covent Garden, they've survived post-Brexit staff shortages and COVID lockdowns.
We have bounced back hard, but we are terrified that, again, mismanagement through this current government have put us in a position of peril for a different reason this Christmas, and that is a cost of living crisis cooked up in Downing Street.
And I know a lot of businesses in London, both in central London and further out, were really looking forward to a Christmas period that hopefully wasn't dominated by COVID and restrictions and people being anxious about going out even when there weren't restrictions. So the last thing on earth they need is to have customers who can't afford their services and their bills going up at the same time.
When Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor, tore up the government's mini-budget, one of the casualties was VAT-free shopping for overseas visitors.
Our competitors, Paris, Madrid, Frankfurt, Dublin, have tax-free shopping
for foreigners. When those foreigners come, they don't just buy things from our shops, they spend money in our restaurants, they spend money in our hotels.
Tax-free shopping would have been a bonus for this independent clothing and jewellery store off Oxford Street. The U-turn has created uncertainty.
Instability doesn't help, obviously, just not only us as a business, but also in terms of customer sentiment, the amount of tourism that's coming into the country. So it's not great, but as small businesses, we just kind of keep weathering through, which is what we always have to do, regardless of what's going on.
For shops, bars and restaurants, the run-up to Christmas and the New Year is known as the Golden Quarter, a boom time for traders. But there's a noticeable lack of seasonal confidence. Simon Harris, ITV News.